Hello out there, and welcome to the eGathering. Hey, tonight we're doing something weird. Like we did last week, we're doing something called the Conversation XL. So we're doing a conversation with more than just me and Rick, in case you can't tell. We've got several people in here, people you probably recognize from my Sunday school class, Southside, if you pay attention to that too. But the topic tonight is tolerance. And so I think we got to start defining tolerance.
Yeah, I think that's
right. I mean, you got to start with
what did you put down? Where did you go for a definition?
Well, the tolerance, the definition that I got from tolerance was for me just talking about what it means to me. Yeah. So do you have a definition?
I got one from Oxford Languages just to talk about tolerance, and it's the ability or willingness to tolerate something, in particular the existence of opinions or behavior that one does not necessarily agree with.
Okay.
And then I broke it down even to the root word tolerate, which to allow the existence, occurrence, or practice of something that one does not necessarily like or agree with without interference.
Okay.
So, kind of
without interference.
Yeah.
What's that, Harvey?
I just made a wisecrack.
Okay.
Does it sound like being married?
Exactly. Ding! There you go. Exactly. So if you want to know what tolerance is, ask Harvey's wife. So does what Rick said ring true? Does that, when you think of tolerance, does that ring true?
Pretty much.
I mean, put up with somebody doing something you don't necessarily agree with. What would be the opposite of that?
Argue with them.
Intolerance, yeah. To argue with them, yeah. What do you think?
To tell them, or whoever or whatever it is you don't agree with about a person or that a person's doing, to argue with them and want them to see things your way and live your way and be your way, and because your way's better. Mm-hmm. That to me would be an intolerance. I think it's important to say that, and we'll probably get into more of this with the discussion, but just because you tolerate something doesn't mean that you necessarily accept it on a whole.
Yeah, I don't like the accept in the beginning of that definition.
Yeah.
And maybe accept to a point, but acceptance ends at affirmation.
There you go.
When it's
now you used a big word. What is affirmation?
I'll consider that you're involved in this lifestyle. I'll respect that you're involved in this lifestyle, but especially if it's a lifestyle that goes against God's plan, or that my acceptance would start to separate me from God.
Yeah.
Affirmation would be making it okay. It's okay for you to be that way.
That's awesome. You just go right ahead. We just think that's great.
Yeah.
These affirmations.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's not tolerance.
No.
Right. Okay.
But I don't like acceptance in that definition, because, at least for the most part, when I think of tolerance, acceptance stops at affirmation. You can't accept it beyond the point that you're making it okay.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
What were you going to say, Harvey?
Well, I mean, you don't think the same way I do, and I don't think the same as you do. And I mean, our points are different.
Yeah.
And that don't mean either one of us are exactly wrong. But when it comes to lifestyle, that's a different story again.
Yeah.
I mean, you know somebody that lives another way, and maybe you don't agree with them, but you still love them and you still like them.
Yeah. You could still be on a bowling team with them, play softball with them, or go to work with them, or and laugh and have a good time and share pizza and be introduced to their family. It would be tolerating them, right? It would be tolerance. Okay.
You were asking about the opposite of tolerance.
Yeah.
I just came up with a good definition here that doesn't involve the word tolerate. It involves an unwillingness to understand or respect those who hold different views or values and can often result in prejudice, discrimination, or hostility towards individuals based on differences.
Yeah. So, why are we talking about it? Rick and I talked about it already like 2 months ago. We already talked about this, but the idea of having all of us, the idea of XL, of having everybody in the room, is just getting you guys' opinion and walking through this. And I think that something that has to be said every time we have some large group like this is, just because I think it doesn't mean that it's right. It doesn't mean that that's the only way of thinking of it. And I appreciate you tolerating me.
I tolerate your
You tolerate my opinion. So I guess all that to say, I want other people's opinions, because I think when we all get together like this, then we get a more full-bodied version of what the realities are. So why on earth would a Christian podcast be talking about tolerance? What relationship does tolerance have to the Christian faith or your religion?
So many people, excuse me, so many people, if you live a different lifestyle, I hate you, I can't do nothing, I can't even be associated with you.
So I'll give you an example out of popular culture. This is Jerry Falwell so many people right now are so freaking out because we've swung so far to the left.
Yeah.
The woke culture and all the different stuff that's going on. And what they don't remember is, if we get in a little time machine and we go back to the late 80s and the 90s, we were in the middle of the opposite side of that. We can't have cancel culture, says the right today, or the conservatives today. You were fine with it back when
it was in your favor.
When it was in our favor, when the 700 Club would say somebody's business was stinky, and then that business would go out of business. So anyway, my point is, Jerry Falwell said that's who he is. He was a pastor and the leader of a university, and famous dude. But he said AIDS is not just God's punishment for homosexuals; it is God's punishment for the society that tolerates homosexuals. So when we're looking for the opposite of tolerance, I think Jerry did a pretty good job. I would also argue that there are an awful lot of folks today from the opposite side of the aisle who are doing the opposite.
When it comes to the relationship, with Christians and why would we be talking about tolerance? I mean, politics is a whole different hand, but the other hand is a vast majority of the time when we talk about tolerance, it's tolerating sin.
Yeah.
Are we tolerating another person's sin, or even are we tolerating our own sin?
Mm-hmm.
That for me is one of the keys of the issue. Tolerance for me is, I can look at another human being, whether I agree with their lifestyle, and I don't just mean the heterosexual, homosexual lifestyle. I'm talking about lifestyle.
One
general.
They could
one
be
slice of the whole
alcoholic.
pie.
They could be
That's
so
the whole
focused on money that it separates them from God. That they any number of things.
But the thing for me is, can I accept the person, the human being, as being a part of God's creation? What they've chosen to do with that, with their own free will, I may or may not agree with. But I can accept them as one of God's children. And so that, for me, is one of the areas that I try to, find a common ground, if you will, so it's maybe not acceptance as like you were talking about, but I can tolerate just as I hope that they would tolerate me, because I'm certainly somebody who a lot of people may not agree with what I do. I haven't met anybody who haven't found me wonderful, but
That would just be wrong. So, I think, Jonathan, I think you did a good job of laying down a line, but the question becomes, where does tolerance swinging up, going out, becomes acceptance, becomes affirmation? Where does that flip over? Because I think the toughie for us is so off because of where we're at culturally right now. We want to immediately go homosexuals, LGBTQ plus. We want to go, that's what we're talking about. That's not what we're talking about as a whole. That is a part of what we're talking about, but that isn't. So let's take that angle. Tolerance of your alcoholic uncle who comes to your Thanksgiving every year. Okay, tolerance. What does tolerance of him look like?
Whatever boundary you set yourself.
Okay, but what? I want to get picky. Okay, what do you mean?
Sitting at the other table, or
what does tolerance of him mean?
allowing
Putting
him
up
to be
with.
there.
That's the first one I was going with, Jonathan.
Allowing him to be
What
there.
was it?
Inviting him to the meal.
Oh,
So I didn't-
Okay, so
Talking to him.
talking to him. Yeah, now we're tolerant. Tolerance, right? Yeah. Okay, what are some other tolerance things? Maybe like one more tolerance thing of your alcoholic uncle at a holiday, Thanksgiving meal.
Not being afraid to give him a handshake or a hug. And
Or a hugging,
of
yeah.
course you are. Say, hey man, it's good to see you.
Yeah.
Well,
All right. So now let's swing a little bit towards acceptance. What's that look like?
putting up with it.
Putting up with it? Yeah.
Having a drink with him.
Having a drink with him. Ooh. Yes, absolutely.
Buying.
No,
edging
Buying
him on when he
access
starts
for
to
him.
That's
Yeah.
acceptance.
Yeah.
Right?
I would not do that.
I know you wouldn't,
Right.
but I'm saying we went from tolerance to acceptance.
Yeah.
So now we're talking about some of those things. What would accepting this alcoholic uncle be like? Buy him a drink. Pour him a
Buying
glass.
for Christmas.
Pour him a glass.
Yeah.
Now we've gone.
Yeah.
Now we've gone clear off the rails.
Right.
But so acceptance means when he starts getting loud with your aunt, when your uncle starts getting loud with your aunt and being mean to her and cruel, you all turn your eye and don't pay attention.
Oh, that's just Uncle Billy.
That's just Uncle Billy. That's just Uncle Billy. I think would be the theme song
Yeah.
of accepting alcoholic Uncle Billy. It would, right? I mean, that's just who he is. All right. So there we go. So now, what's affirmation look like in that situation?
Well, you would, most likely, somebody would probably kind of step in.
No, if we're going to affirm him, what I mean by affirming them is not only accepting that he does it, but making it seem like it's okay and we like it.
Yeah.
That's
I don't
affirming
know.
him.
I don't know where I could do that.
No, how could you do that, right?
I don't
But
know.
what would it look like if we
He
affirmed
only
him?
hit you because he had a sip of vodka.
Yeah, now we're
It's okay.
explaining for him. Yeah, we're affirming his
Covering
behavior.
him for him,
Yeah.
But I didn't even think of that.
We see that
I would
with,
think he would say, Uncle Billy, you're getting a little bit out of hand here. You need to pipe down a little bit.
Well, that's the point where your tolerance ends.
That's where tolerance ends and passes acceptance and starts coming towards affirmation. When I think the reason I go through that whole weird gas gauge dealy is to kind of say, I think once we reach this side of acceptance, we have to start going, okay, at what point is tolerance becoming acceptance, becoming affirmation, becoming damaging? At what point is it becoming damaging?
I think that damaging part is very important because that situation happens all the time in families. And it's sad to say that we have to be tolerant of our family members, but you've had situations, or we have had, that we try to make a safe space for one person and it creeps over onto the other person's safe space.
Yep.
So, I mean, you have to try to, and you can't be the one balancing everything. If you have 12 people and you're the only one that
right.
invited the person because you're tolerant of them, and the other 11 are not at your same
Yep.
level with them.
Yeah.
So then maybe they drop out from coming to the events because Uncle Billy's there.
So tolerance and acceptance can also be situational.
Sure.
Is what you're saying.
There's a word in addiction circles that talks about enabling. And somebody who would enable them is almost, I mean, you could almost say that they're affirming this person's problem. They make excuses. They give money. Well, he needs a little bit of money, and I'm going to give him this, or she needs money, or there's a thing where you're enabling becomes an affirmation to the person who's in the addiction that they're okay with it, so I'll just use them till I use them up. And then you move on to the next person who will enable and affirm.
Juan, I talking about dealing with it in families. One of the early experiences that Rhonda had with me was me coming home and having to kick my great uncle and great aunt out of my house because they were so drunk they couldn't. They were cussing me and cussing my sister and brother, and I mean I'm 17 and I'm having to tell them, you got to go. And you need to go back out to your car, and no, I'm not giving you your keys. You need to go back out to your car and stay there. That's where you're staying. You're not coming in the house till you get dried up. So yeah, there comes a point where you do have to say, this has gone this far you have come, and you shall go no farther, right? But I think we used the word.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
When somebody who's.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. There just comes a point where, what is that point? What is that breakover? Where is that your tolerance needs to stop? What is that thing that starts happening?
Probably each person's different.
I understand that.
I think Jonathan hit on it, though. Jonathan, you were talking about when it starts affecting your spiritual relationship.
If your acceptance and affirmation of someone else's actions starts to separate you from God, that's where it goes too far. I think that's pretty much what I said.
Yeah. When it the words that come to me are when it becomes destructive. When it starts becoming destructive, because it doesn't necessarily have to be your relationship with God. It can be physically destroying stuff, hurting people.
Well, that's what I was talking about. Use Uncle Billy as a.
Yeah.
But if he's hollering at his wife, cussing and caving on and getting all bent out of shape, then that's when you need to step in and say you need to.
Yep.
Cool it.
And when you're talking about tolerance, I think there's the tolerating somebody in a drug addiction is different than, and it's almost like the word tolerate is too strong, but somebody who has a different faith belief than you do.
Yeah.
Or somebody who is of a different gender or race or social economic status or whatever that might be. I've got, or even the person who digs at you at work and you're supposed to love them and care for them, and but there comes a point where you have to separate yourself because what they may be doing is destructive to your physical, like you were saying, your physical health.
When they become, when damage starts being done.
But
Destruction.
Tolerance comes at different levels in different situations.
Absolutely. Wouldn't it be so nice if we could go, that's a number 7.
Yeah, that's
and
a
we don't tolerate number 7s.
Right.
But a number 4, we're good with number 4s.
And
It doesn't work that way, does it?
it depends on the person too,
Sure.
especially like in a church setting. I would be more willing to tolerate something that Kay's caught up in than I would that Pastor Todd is caught up in.
Goes back to a conversation we had a while back about sin.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that sin could be different for Juan and Harvey? Are there things that God has dealt with Juan about that Juan knows that's not okay? That's sin for him. Same thing, God hasn't dealt with Harvey about it yet. And so for Harvey, it's okay.
And I don't have to tell Harvey about Harvey's issue. That's God's.
You don't have, yeah. And at some point,
Mm-hmm.
and most of these things are not, it's okay for Harvey to put an axe in someone's forehead, but it's not okay, it's not that stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I think a good example, wow, we're going to get off the trail. There's an example of something that I was dealing with, and I called Rick, and Rick said, has God dealt with you on that yet? And I said, no. He said, well, then just don't worry about it right now. He's starting to deal with you, and he will. But it goes back to something Pastor Mel said. He said, smoking won't send you to hell. It'll just make you smell like you've been there. So,
but the thing is, as God dealt with you on that, then you began to realize where it was at with your heart.
right,
And you were able to overcome it.
right.
And
But I had like 75 other things that were
Sure.
more of a priority to him at that moment.
at that moment, right?
And that's a good segue to tolerance, the tolerance of Christ.
Yeah. You know what I keep coming back to is this thing about the Samaritan woman at the well.
Yeah.
And the leper who the disciples were saying, stay away, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then the Samaritan woman at the well, you know, he's talking to a Samaritan. He's talking to a Samaritan woman.
Mm-hmm.
He's talking to a Samaritan woman who's been married how many times?
Mm-hmm.
Plus he's in Samaria.
Yeah, and that's intolerance.
Yeah.
That's the disciples were
Because
intolerant.
most of them
Jesus
walked
was-
way around that and not go
Well,
through.
yeah,
it,
they
not
didn't even want to enter the city.
And most of the people wouldn't have been at the well at noon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But here we have Jesus who spoke with her, asked her for a drink, was going to drink out of a cup that she was providing. You know, and how is it that you, a Jew, are asking me, a Samaritan? You know, and then struck up the conversation with her. That was tolerance. That was, and that for me is another picture of where he saw this woman as his child, one of his. And I think it's the same thing that he was trying to tell us. See people as one of mine. Doesn't mean that you have to accept, as John was saying, what they're doing, but it means that you have to know that they're still part of my creation, one of mine. I just keep going back to the Samaritan issue in it.
Yeah, well, I mean, Dr. Stark talked to us this week about that,
Yeah,
and that is fresh. We all kind of just walked through all that. When we deal with, or when Jesus dealt with people, was he tolerant? Is that fair to say? Was Jesus tolerant?
Yes.
With levels, because he was tolerant of everybody really but the Pharisees.
But that goes back to what you were saying about it would be different if Kay was doing something and I was doing something. And that goes back to situational tolerance.
4 and 7. Back to 4 and 7.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
And when you're talking
Exactly.
about the people of that time, without going into things that they worshipped and how they worshipped and oaths they made, and Jesus wasn't oblivious to all that, and he would sit at the table with them, and you know, hey guys, I am the way. If you don't accept that, I still love you.
Yep.
and this isn't just a New Testament thing. This is an Old Testament thing. I found it in Leviticus 19. Scripture reads, "You shall not persecute him, the alien who resides with you shall be like a citizen of yours, and you shall love him as yourself, because you were aliens in the land of Egypt." I think the Lord is trying to remind us that as much as we might look at somebody else as different than us, there are people who are looking at us and going, "They're different.
Mm-hmm.
They're a little weird or strange,
Right.
or whatever." Yeah, and if we're looked at like that, and we look at others like that, then I think that one of the lessons in this is we got to watch how we separate ourselves from people, and think of ourselves as maybe better than what they are when we're really not. We're in the same situation.
When are you guys all familiar with the fact that Jesus was referred to as a glutton and a drunkard? Okay. I'll go out on a limb here and say I think you all know the answer to this. Was Jesus a glutton and a drunkard?
He does say, "I came eating and drinking," or the Son of Man came eating and drinking.
Does eating and drinking make you a glutton and a drunkard?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily, yeah. So so now we're heading down that trail. What's a glutton?
Same thing as a glutton for punishment. I mean, I've heard that for years. I mean,
Enjoys food so much that he eat too much.
Yeah. When you overeat, you overindulge.
That word tolerance also a lot of times is used with pain. And the same thing happens. My knees tolerate right now that I weigh more than I should. But when they stop tolerating it, then I'm going to have a problem.
Yes.
So
yeah.
that's like everything. And that word pain sounds terrible, but if you're friendship with someone and they're weighing on you,
yes,
and wearing you down, that friendship might be okay if you can tolerate it. But then when you can't, you have to get away so you don't break it.
Tolerance, acceptance, affirming. Yeah, I mean, yeah. That's such a good example.
Mm-hmm.
Tolerance, you tolerate the pain, but then where it breaks off is when it starts doing damage. When you're doing damage, when destruction is occurring, is when we've passed over into this acceptance and.
and that's the same thing with a person. I mean,
Absolutely. When they.
Here it's okay, but there it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's why it has to be. That's why we have to say it's nuanced. It's not. It's not. That's a 6 or that's a 2 or that's a.
Now what?
It's nuanced.
With me or with him and I is different. I could be here and he's here.
Yeah.
I mean, and I could be here and he's here.
Yep. Absolutely. So, if Jesus was not a glutton or a drunkard, why was he called a glutton and a drunkard? Why did they? He says this himself. He says, John came eating little or nothing, and you called him crazy, and I come eating and drinking, and you call me a glutton and a drunkard. Why was he being called a glutton and a drunkard? What's that about?
That was people's perception of him because of who he hung out with.
Because of who he hung out with.
Because of what?
Because of who he hung out with.
Okay.
He went ahead and went to the parties. So John didn't go to the parties. John didn't go to the parties. John stayed out in the woods. He ate locusts and honey, and he didn't deal with people. I mean, he put on a camel skin, wrapped a rope around him, and wrapped a belt around him, and walked around. He wasn't concerned with what people were doing. But Jesus went to the dinner party when he was invited. He had a glass of wine when they invited him to have it. He spent time with those people. He did the things and had the stuff. So if I say Jesus tolerated these people, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah.
That he would have been being called a glutton and a drunkard because he tolerated those people?
Well,
More
I'm
than
sure,
tolerated
because
them.
he hung out
enjoyed
with them.
He enjoyed his time with them.
Absolutely.
I mean, if I went to bars all the time, and although didn't get drunk, but drank once in a while, then that could be part of it.
Yep, they
But
might,
he
someone
went to
might know
parties,
you.
or
Yeah.
he went to all of these feasts and stuff to just, to be seen and get his words in.
There you go,
I
absolutely.
mean, I don't drink, but a lot of people drink a glass of wine when they eat and stuff. And I don't see any problem with that. Now, if you're gonna sit there and drink 4 or 5 glasses of wine, that's a different story. But if you're having a glass of wine with your meal, and which back in them days, they didn't have access to water like we have.
But Harvey, you said something there that I think is one of the main points of this. He sat with these people and he ate with these people and he drank with these people so that he could share himself, share the message, share what was going on, what was about to happen, so they could know. And one of the things that I think that we as Christians have been misguided in is that we feel like we have to separate ourselves from everything all the time in order to keep ourselves pure. When one of my favorite sayings is that if you're going to rub elbows with a sheep, then you're going to end up smelling like a sheep. And that's the thing that when they saw Jesus walking and eating and talking and drinking with people, they called him a glutton and a drunkard. But he was doing it so he could share the good news. And I think that a lot of times we as Christians have separated ourselves to the point that we're so. Remember the old saying, "So heavenly minded, you're no earthly good." And it seems like at times we've made ourselves, we want to be so pure and so holy that we've forgotten that we're called to get down to the nitty gritty.
Mm-hmm.
Also that sometimes people will do that, the name calling of glutton and this and that, is because if they could push that person down, then they're more.
That's a good point, Juan.
They try to build themselves up and push the other one down at the same time.
Yep.
So it's okay because the pastor over there at that church, he wears sandals on Sunday.
Right.
And then, and then over here.
Sandals?
Yeah, they're like, so, I mean, it doesn't have to be sandals, it doesn't have to be the alcohol, it doesn't have to be the behavior that someone wants to push you down so that they don't feel so bad about themselves sometimes. And Harvey's point of me being over here and him being over here, if we never get closer than that, me and Harvey are not gonna have a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
If I fish every single day, and Harvey doesn't fish at all and doesn't want to, me and his time that we spend together for him to be able to share with me is not gonna happen very easy. So, but if he goes fishing, even if he doesn't like it, but he sits out there, and then maybe instead of him going my way, I'll be coming more his way. And then he can share things about him that I didn't know, and I would have never known had he not leaned over my way or come, like, whatever it is that you're doing that other people do. And I'm not saying to do a horrible thing like John said, not to cross the line that makes you further away from God. But the importance of that tolerance is to help people see what you're doing and move closer that way.
To be attracted to it. I think we this weekend, it's interesting that we're having this conversation and we just listened to Dr. Stark talk about some of these things. And one of his points was, you have to be open to the fact that you have to give the other person credit for having knowledge and understanding and something to help you grow. You can't look at them like, oh, I'm gonna fix you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so much better. I'm gonna fix you. You have to give them value. Jesus appears to the woman at the well, and he asks her for something she has that is of value to him. He immediately establishes her value as having something that is of value to him. If I start, I love the fishing idea, story one. I didn't. As soon as you said that, and that is such a great example of if Harvey's at step 7 and you're at step 3, and you love to fish, and Harvey really could care less about fishing. Harvey going fishing with you is an incredible way of getting to spend some time together. You're never going to get to, oh, Jonathan, I know we just did this in Romans. I know we did it, and I'm going to misquote it, so help me. We just did this in the Connections Bible study, and it was the idea that how will they know unless someone tells them? And how will someone tell them unless someone preaches the word to them? Yep. How will they know these things unless you spend some time with them? How will Juan ever make it to step 7 unless Harvey's willing to go spend some time with him doing something that Juan's good at? Juan's good at fishing. Juan's at step 7 in fishing. Harvey's at step I don't care. But how's and by looking at Juan and establishing value in Juan and his ability to fish, and letting him be the smart one, the one with the thing to offer, then you've gotten him to invite you into his world, and you make a connection with that. And then here's the wacky thing: you might actually end up liking fishing.
For those who are watching, if they want to look it up, it's Romans chapter 10, verse 14.
Okay. 14. What's it say?
But how will, this is an amplified, but how will people call on him in whom they have not believed? How will they believe in him of whom they have not heard? How will they hear without a preacher or messenger? How will they preach unless they are commissioned and sent?
So Jesus was intolerant of who? Who was Jim? And we have lots of Jesus intolerant stories. In fact, he was kind of snarky at times.
We just talked about.
Yeah. Who was he intolerant of?
The Jews, a lot of them.
The Jews. Most everybody he ran into was a Jew. So which Jews?
The higher up Jews.
The higher up Jews. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the teachers of the law.
The ones that should have known better.
The ones that should have known better. Yeah. He was intolerant of the churchy people. So what's weird is what I imagine is Jesus comes to your church and he may not be so nice to you. But if you all go together on a missions trip together, it's great when you're with him. Right? So why was intolerance okay? I think Jonathan kind of said it already, but why was intolerance okay from Jesus to these or to the churchy people?
Because they was believing the wrong stuff.
They were believing the wrong stuff, yeah. But most of his intolerance was over what?
Money. Some of it was money.
Some of it was over money.
They was taking the money and they shouldn't have been taking it.
But where were they? What were they doing with the money? It's interesting.
Themselves.
The scripture last week went through this. What were they doing with the money? Last week, Jesus says to these guys, he says, look, you want to give me grief about the fact that my guys don't wash their hands before they come to dinner. But here's the thing that's flustering to me. That's a rule you made up. That's not a rule that God made up. It's a rule you made up. And the rule you made up is on you. That's fine. But the rule God made up was to honor your mother and father. Mm-hmm. And you are telling people that they can, if they take their money that they could have helped their mom and dad with, and they give it to the church, that's okay. That's messed up. So the things he would get upset with him about with money would be, you know, he says, you tithe it down to 1/10 of your spice. And he says, that's fine. You just keep doing that. That's fine. But you need to be taking care of the poor. You need to be being involved in missions and loving on people and caring for people. I mean, am I paraphrasing way too much?
No, you're doing
I think I'm hitting it. All right.
Yeah.
So his intolerance over money was that. It wasn't.
He was extremely upset with the people who were taking advantage of people unfairly, under a false pretense.
Yeah.
And I think you explained it really well. And that to him was like this huge no-no, and it caused him, like we talked about the other day, it caused him to be very angry with the situation.
Yeah. He got mad. That was generally what he was getting mad about.
I mean, mad enough to make a whip.
To go out. Look, I'll stay here. I'll be right back. Go outside. Make a whip. Come back in.
The only thing when you and I talked about that, I forgot, and I thought about later on, the only thing that would have made that worse if you'd have made them go out and make the whip.
Yeah. Yeah, they probably wouldn't have gone and got their own switch.
Yeah, go get your own switch.
Yeah.
Come back.
All right. So
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Have you, and not everybody's going to want to answer this, not everybody has to, but have you ever gone so far as to be uncomfortable in an uncomfortable setting to share the gospel with somebody?
Yes. Been uncomfortable to share the gospel?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I've been there
I'll
too.
admit that.
Yeah. But I think that's a good thing. I think it's a growing thing to be in a place where this isn't my regular group of people, but I'll be here because you feel like the Lord wants you to be there for a reason.
Till you make them your regular group of people.
Yeah.
Like Dr. Stark said this week, where's your well?
Yeah.
Where's your well?
Exactly.
Right.
And that and it can be uncomfortable, guys. It can be a bit difficult.
So I'm thinking of something we're going to talk about, and that is your trigger.
Mm-hmm.
Triggers for sin. What's your trigger? And so that's kind of a hint to what I'm talking about. When does you tolerating something and accepting something, being around something, become a problem for you?
Well, it has to be, it depends on what it is. I mean,
Jonathan already talked about it a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. What if I'm Uncle Billy and I've come to a faith in Christ and I've given up alcohol? Is an ideal ministry for me to be going into bars?
No.
Sitting and having a drink with the guys? Because I understand them.
Mm-hmm.
They would understand me. We could talk. It would be great.
Back to the family thing, Uncle Billy quit drinking, but he goes to a family event and everybody else is drinking because they don't have a problem with it, but Uncle Billy does. So what do? Uncle Billy just has to tough it out, or do you say, hey, that's not going to happen today. Uncle Billy's coming and we don't want to make him fall. We don't want to make him uncomfortable. So not having a drinking event would be more tolerant for Uncle Billy, and the other ones that were wanting to have a drink with their meal, I mean, that's where the tolerance thing comes in on their part also. Can they eat a meal without having a drink and still have a meal?
Now the question is, if you can't,
If
are
they
you an
can't,
alcoholic?
exactly.
Yeah. There's a line in Romans that is one of the reasons why the Nazarene faith encourages abstinence from alcohol. The Nazarene religion encourages abstinence from alcohol. One of the reasons is the line from Romans where Paul says this a few times. He starts and he says, I am allowed to do all things. There's nothing I'm I'm prohibited from doing, which is his way of saying, I don't have the law. I don't have like, you can't do number 7. I don't have that. I'm allowed to do all things. But not all things are good for me. I'm allowed to do all things. But if what I do causes my brother to fall, then I have sinned. So, if Uncle Billy comes to your cookout, and you got a big barrel with beer shoved down in ice, and most of the folks there could have 1 or 2 and be fine with their burger, and we're going to have a great day, and this is fine. It didn't cost you anything to not put that barrel out there, or to fill it with Coke. It didn't cost you anything, right? So there's that breakover point, and if you're Uncle Billy, then and you're having that cookout, and now you're not an alcoholic anymore, you absolutely don't have any business putting that barrel out there with beer in. There's that break.
Or a gambler going to a Monday night poker game.
Yeah. If you've got a gambling problem,
gambler, don't go.
Don't go.
Or, like you said, a drinker, or a gentleman who has a problem with pornography, don't go to the local, what is it, Triple X place or something.
Yeah. Or watch a Hardee's commercial.
Yeah.
When those were out for so long, you're like,
but yeah,
give me a break.
You don't go to places that will cause you. Jonathan stated this in the beginning. You don't go to witness at places that would potentially cause you to stumble.
Yeah.
I'm worried about that.
I don't know, guys. Is there anything else you can think of on the topic of tolerance? Is something else that we haven't mentioned yet? Was Jesus tolerant of you?
We had to be. That's every one of us.
No, he didn't have to be.
No, I didn't have to be.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. No, he didn't have to be. He didn't have to be tolerant of you at all. He could have said,
heck with you, go on.
I'll meet you when this trip's over, and there's going to be a checklist, and you've got 7, 3, and 4, and 10 repeatedly, and you're going to hell. He didn't have to sit down. I mean, let's talk about who the fellows were that Jesus was running around with.
They were flunkies, actually.
They were flunkies. They just were, by human Jewish standards.
Yeah.
So who was it? What do we got?
Fishermen.
We got a fisherman.
Tax collectors.
We got a tax collector.
They was all cooker in a dog's hind leg.
Yes, they were. Yes, they were. We've got a lady who was possessed by demons.
Yeah.
Who he ran around with.
One of the ones who wrote most of the books of the New Testament.
Yeah.
Was a murderer.
He was a
Murderer.
flat out murderer.
Of his people.
Hey, wait a minute. You collected taxes? Rookie.
Yeah.
I killed him.
So I get what I'm driving at is when we think about, I think that one of the most disturbing things to me is I don't know how we got the religion that many Christians have out of that book, reading about that man. How did we get the religious right that was going and telling people they were going to hell? How did we get the people standing by the road saying God hates fags? What, wait a minute, did you read? Are we reading the same book? What? Huh? How did we get that out of those things?
At the very beginning, you asked about the meaning of tolerance and why we have to be tolerant in the church. And some of that answer is because we weren't always tolerant as a church. And we wanted them to be like us, and we would beat on them until they was. And, I mean, that left a lot of hurt people.
We have a lot of making to do, don't we, brother?
Yeah.
We have a lot of healing to do.
Well, the old Nazarene church was bad about that.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, Harvey, is if you go back and study the origins of the Nazarene Church, it was exactly not that. But people took this the whole holiness movement thing to mean legalistic, cruel holiness instead of holiness as Mildred Wynkoop, the Nazarene theologian, said, a theology of love was what we were based on. But we got way out there, because as soon as you said holiness, everybody went, oh, that means we all have to dress just right, and we have to hold our hair just right, and we can't dance.
Sure.
We can't wear wedding rings. And there was a long time, a Nazarene pastor wasn't allowed to wear a wedding ring, wasn't allowed to have a beard.
Oh, no.
No facial hair.
Miriam Daughtery and her husband, well, the whole family used to sing the Daughtery.
Yeah.
And they were singing someplace on Sunday morning, and the pastor of that church, Miriam had a ring on, and that pastor asked her husband to have her to take it off before they sang. Her husband didn't ask her, she would have took it off anyhow.
Yeah.
But I mean,
yeah.
But that
was who we were for a while.
Yeah.
Because can we just be tolerant of those people too? Can we recognize that we can, at one point, we flipped so far that if you wore jeans and a t-shirt, you were picking on people who wore a suit to church that day. You're like, wait, you just flipped that. You flipped it. Yeah, we need to be tolerant of those people too, to grasp. Okay, guys, that's what I got.
I remember growing up, I didn't go to church without good clothes on.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean,
Now we can start the debate about tolerating people who with different political opinions.
Yeah. Well, that's what's okay. So now you pick that. Yeah. Isn't that what's broke about us though right now? Is the lack of tolerance.
Yep.
We can't disagree about something without, well, you're evil. You're an awful person.
Isn't it sad that that's immediately where we go?
Yeah.
Anymore in the society.
You're a bad person. I can't deal with you.
That's kind of why I tried to pull him away from it when he first mentioned it.
Yeah. So I won't go politics, but I will go. I think that's what's broken about us as a people is we have forgotten to be able. You used to be able to go sit. A group of farmers used to be able to go sit at the cafe around a table and talk about what was going on in their lives and what was going on with their crops and talk about and laugh at each other about their politics and go on and now they got to come to fisticuffs. People can't go to a party and have an argument in the party without one of them got to go outside, get their gun, come back and shoot everybody.
I mention stuff a lot like that in my regular farm page videos is with Grandpa sitting around the bake shop, sitting around the coffee shop, talking with the old men. And there was never that kind of fighting. And that's how I was raised. Even right now, my neighbors are extremely politically different than me, but we love each other.
They eat food.
We're passing, we're passing stuff across the fence to each other. We see how each other's doing.
Tolerance and acceptance.
Yes. But that's how I was raised. We never brought politics into it. So.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that though, because it reminded me of when you're young, you're not very tolerant of old people. But if young people don't talk to old people, what are they going to know? We already to that point. Used to, if your dad was a mechanic, you or one of your brothers or somebody in the family was going to be a mechanic eventually. Same thing. I mean, it was just something that passed down because you spent time with that person.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen no more. Some kids are leaving high school, going to college, leaving college and going out, and they don't know anything other than what was in a book, and they don't know how to apply that to their life. And the thing is, sometimes it's not the Bible, the book that they're in, and so they don't know how to do anything. And I see adult, I call them adults at my work. They're and I'm not beating up on them. They're 20 and 30 years old, and they act like a 16-year-old. They have the same interests. They have the same kind of behavior, the same kind of. I mean, it's not childish per se, but it's they're looking at cartoons and reading. And I'm old. I like comics and cartoons too, but I don't have them on my desk, but it's something that I don't enjoy like they do.
Yeah.
So I asked them about what is it that they're what part of it is that they like, and I'm talking to them and stuff like that. And they all call me, say, hey, old man, when I get to work. But they're so loving and they're so kind, and, but they're different than me. And they're mostly, Puerto Rican guys that came from Puerto Rico to work here.
Okay.
And so their families, their dads, their grandpas, their uncles and all that are in Puerto Rico still. And so they kind of look up to me to hang out, we talk, and sometimes they make me food, sometimes I bring them food, and we talk. But if they didn't want to talk to me just because of our age difference, because I'm going on 60, and they're in their 20s.
Yeah.
But they hang out with me, we laugh, we have a good time, we've had them over to the house. We go out to do stuff together, out to eat, celebrate birthdays, families, it's important.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where we have that connection, that if they weren't tolerant of an older person, we wouldn't be able to talk.
And they lose.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
and
me
that
too.
goes back to what Dr. Stark said about recognize the other person has value. Recognize that they have some value, and you can grow together. All hearts clear? Hey guys, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.